Okay, we are live. I'm with Kyle Murphy. He's at the Bitcoin Bum on Twitter. Kyle, I appreciate you jumping on, man.
Thanks for having me, man.
All right, just making sure everything is up and running. We are live on LinkedIn, YouTube, and on Twitter. So shout out to everybody. If you're just now jumping in, let us know where you're coming from, or even if you're watching the VOD, especially on LinkedIn, like let us know where you're coming from. You can always do that. So, Kyle, I'm going to give you a couple minutes to give a little bit of background about yourself. We have a lot to talk about, obviously mostly Bitcoin related, but I really enjoy your story. I think it's very inspirational. But a little bit of context or background for yourself, and then we'll go from there.
Yeah, sure. Really, where to begin? I guess I grew up pretty modest means, rural, outskirts, Western Pennsylvania, single mother, kind of grew up. I'm not going to say dirt poor, but definitely lower middle class to lower class. Joined the military at 18 years old to escape the kind of wrong direction I was heading with my youth. Um, Found myself in a better place and also simultaneously like a worse place. I learned discipline, learned a lot of the positives that come from the military, but also found myself really struggling with kind of the more war oriented side of things. I mean, PTSD, alcoholism, kind of really my life post military was a giant disaster. Found yoga, or maybe more accurately, yoga found me. Started to kind of work on finding peace for the things I'd thought, the things I'd done, the kind of person I'd become. I just really just learned to acknowledge that there was things wrong with me that I had not been addressing. And then in the process of like going down the rabbit hole of spirituality, I was introduced to Bitcoin in probably late 2016. A very brief intro, just enough to like get that it was going to be something, but
Mhm.
not enough to ever really dive into it. And then from there, it just kind of became this traveler's spiritual path. It went from leaving Western Pennsylvania to a van life road trip to California, which then became a 1 year backpacking trip around the world, Eastern Europe, South Africa, a lot of Southeast Asia, and then back to California. And then, obviously, after only a few months having returned to California, pandemic hit. Um, that's, I would say, shortly after March 13th, right around the time I left San Francisco, California with most of my van life community, is when the full scale like dive into Bitcoin happened. It was like I'm watching my friends trading, doing day trading, jumping into Robinhood and then Fidelity and a bunch of other things. And it was like, this is exactly the moment that the years of like on off, just like everywhere I went in my travels, it was like Bitcoin was a recurring theme. So when the pandemic hit, it was just like, this is exactly what this is built for. From what little I have learned, I know enough to know that like this is where you guys should be putting money. And that's where we're at now. The past 18 months have been kind of my full-time gig has been just studying and learning as much as I can about Bitcoin and actually jumping into it with some skin in the game.
Go back to 2016, specifically with Bitcoin. Like, how did you see it back then? I know you mentioned it was more like on the surface level, but how did you kind of view it then? And then how has it changed to now? I mean, obviously, it's deeper knowledge base for yourself. The last 18 months you said, but can you compare the two? Because I feel like I don't feel, I know this. I had Svetsky on a couple months ago. We talked about like the progression of Bitcoiners. Can you talk about your progression from like that 16 to now?
Yeah, so huge difference. 2016, the introduction is actually from a young kid, uh, probably at the time couldn't have been any older than 20, 21 years old. Um, he was going through yoga teacher training with me, introduced me to it. And when I say like introduced me super like surface level, I mean like I got a 10-minute pitch about like, hey, have you heard about this thing called Bitcoin? Like it's internet money, it's kind of decentralized. You can imagine what somebody's able to tell you about Bitcoin in like 10 minutes or less, like very, very little.
Mhm.
Um, but it was enough where like in that 10 minutes I walked away like, well, that's really interesting. And based on the life I've already lived, like kind of immediately getting out of the military, it became like subconsciously clear to me that some type of revolution was coming. Like I started telling people almost immediately upon my reintegration into civilian life that a revolution was imminent. I didn't know what that was going to look like or why, but I knew something needed to change. And when I was introduced to Bitcoin, it just like kind of like had that subconscious click where it was like, that makes sense. Like I know that's going to be a thing. Like the world we live in today, there's no way that's not going to make sense to people. So I remember shortly after that, about $500 of Bitcoin, I told my parents to buy some. They were like, where, how?
Wait, so this was
And like
16,
the level of education,
you said
this
6.
is, yeah, it might have been late 16, early 17 at that point.
Mm-hmm.
And they asked where, how, and this is like how superficial it was. It was like, I have no idea. I think Mount Gox might have existed back then, but even if it did, I didn't know about it. I literally knew nothing. I just knew that it was something that seemed like it was going to be valuable, and that like if you had some money, you should probably buy into it. And then that was it. And then over the years, after I left Pennsylvania, moved to California, I found myself having random, every once in a while, it's like a conversation with a professor in a college class, or somebody at a coffee shop who knows about it. And then as I backpacked, it was like I talked to people about it in South Africa. I talked to people about it in I remember having a conversation on the steps in front of a hostel in Romania where I came to the conclusion that it was like it had already reached that place with the way it was built, where I was like, there's no way that this thing could be shut down. It's already too big and too powerful. So it just like everywhere I went, there's like this one conversation, this one little next step in like my understanding of it. And then, like I said, the pandemic hit, and it was like I'm watching the market tank. I'm watching everybody in like this frenzy of trading, trying to make all these dollars. And I'm like, guys, the problem is the dollar. Like all of this madness is because the dollar's broken. Like you should be buying Bitcoin. The unfortunate part is that at the moment, like in that moment, I was in the process of building this truck I'm living in right now, and all of my money was going to that. In hindsight, I'd probably have maybe 5x the amount of Bitcoin I have if I just thrown my mattress on the floor and started buying Bitcoin then. But, you know, I think every Bitcoiner at some point in their life has that one time where it's like, man, if I had just done this differently.
Yeah, we all have
And
those.
that's, yeah,
Yeah, it's the choices.
that's fair.
It's interesting too. Like,
So that's kind of the progression.
yeah. So for those that may have not have, heard of that progression we talk about, is so essentially is kind of like number one is speculation. Two is Bitcoin as an asset allocation, like as part of a air quote portfolio. So portfolio managers love it, love this step. Then three becomes Bitcoin's your unit of account. So, there's a lot of people in different progressions of, in different areas. Some people are on step zero. They don't even think it's even worth the speculation, right? But, one speculation, two asset allocation, and three is unit of account. And it's just, I've just talked to so many people about it, and everyone's story is a little bit different of like how they got there. And like you're saying, like through your travels to different countries and just like getting a feel. Feel like you just even just talking to you just for a couple minutes that you've been around a lot of different people from a lot of different places, and that gives you a better like rounded perspective as what's happening.
Yeah, I think that's relatively accurate. It's like it was for many, many years, from the 2016 introduction until literally this pandemic, it was never something I fully dove into as like this is something I absolutely need to be in. But it was just like, it was very people oriented. Everywhere I went, there was someone who somehow found themselves in a conversation about Bitcoin with me. So it was like all of these different perspectives from different people around the world, why it seemed to work for them, why they believed in it. And then that slow build up over time from different cultures, different financial backgrounds, literally different geographical locations. It was just like, okay, this thing is clearly global. It's clearly a thing that everyone everywhere can benefit from. I mean, everywhere I've been, they're talking about it. They're seeing the benefits of it. So when this pandemic hit, it was just like, dude, what are you waiting for?
So let's talk about like mindset. So how has Bitcoin like changed your like overall mindset as far as like within your life, relationships, and just how you get up every day? Because I think there's pre-Bitcoin and post-Bitcoin. You mentioned how fiat. Look, and I say this a lot. I get a lot of flack from a lot of places. Good friends, not so great friends. Just random trolls on LinkedIn or something. But it's you say when you say fiat's going to zero, people don't like that, and they see Bitcoin as a threat to an entire financial system. Like let's say it's $500 trillion, counting derivatives and everything else and whatnot. It's in my opinion, at some point it's going to zero. And if you understand like Weimar Republic, if you understand what happens when money printer goes and doesn't stop, right? The law of acceleration. You listen to Breedlove, you listen to Safety, you listen to all of them, and even just like I'm no like maybe a percentage point of a Breedlove or a Safety, but you just need to know a percentage of what they know and what they're saying, right? If you just take little small pieces and put it all together, it gives you this idea that there's an old financial system and there's a new financial system that's Bitcoin, and it just continues to absorb that monetary value and that monetary energy, a la Sailor. So I don't know if you had a thought on that, and then how it gives you hope. So obviously Michael Saylor says Bitcoin is hope, and he owns hope.com. So I mean, does that resonate with you?
It does, and I think on your point of like fiat is trending to zero. I mean, obviously, there's a lot of different ways to kind of argue that that's unlikely, and I, for the life of me, can't remember who's quoted as saying this, and I might even butcher the quote to a degree, but it goes along the lines of all goods trend towards the nominal cost of production, and the dollar costs nothing to produce. They open a computer, they add two zeros to the books, and then maybe it costs a few dollars in like the raw materials of cut down trees and print the paper, but it next to nothing. I mean, in the last 18 months we've added $10 trillion, maybe more, to the actual supply of the US dollar, and like what was the nominal cost of that production? Next to nothing. So I think that statement makes a lot of sense to me. It's like, if it costs absolutely nothing to produce, what is its real value? I mean, if it can be made out of thin air, what makes it valuable? And at that point, it's really just the belief in it, which I think is why eventually it will trend towards zero, but also why I think it probably has longer than a lot of the avid Bitcoiners believe, because there's still pretty strong belief in as you were describing, some of the people who see that as a threat. My uncle, my grandparents, the people who have spent their whole lives working within that system. It's very scary to think that that system might not last through the retirement that they've worked towards. However, coming back to the hope idea of things, I think that Bitcoin is a powerful tool for hope because it ties into that concept that I was discussing with this idea of revolutions. And it's a peaceful tool to okay, let me back up a bit. For the longest time, I believed there was this revolution in the US that was imminent. I didn't know how to pinpoint what it was going to be caused by or why it needed to happen, but I felt that something was wrong. Then I traveled around the world, and it became apparent that it was more than a US phenomenon. It was a kind of global revolution that was taking place. Like everywhere I went had some level of this race or money based tension. Everybody everywhere has some level of like socioeconomic strife in every country everywhere, from like the biggest cities in the most well-developed nations to the most rural villages in Vietnam and Indonesia. So this idea of revolution grew from US based to world based. And then during the summer of the pandemic, I was talking to my uncle about that revolution. And he pointed out something to me that was really interesting. It was this idea that it's not a revolution, it's an evolution. And that really resonated with me because the idea is that it's just time. What we need is time. And I think that kind of ties into where Bitcoin becomes hope, because Bitcoin, if you store your energy there, it is really a time saving, like that's what it is. It saves human time. Like the energy you put into it now saves you energy for the future, and your energy is time. Like if you want your time to be more freed up in the future, then like putting your energy now into Bitcoin allows you to save that energy for a later time, and gives you more freedom to put more energy into it. So it's like the more energy you put into Bitcoin, the more freedom of time you have, and the more freedom of time you have, the more energy you can then put into Bitcoin. So it's just like this, once you get into it, it's this loop of like, wow, this might actually be a way out of the kind of wage slavery that everybody's found themselves in. It's you retire and then you start back to work. It's like no one actually ever lives their life. They're stuck.
Yeah, and go back. So we go back to like the evolution side of it. I totally agree with that. Because you kind of started like with revolution, and then your uncle mentioned like evolution. Money is evolving.
Mm,
Money hasn't always been paper fiat, right? But to, like a couple generations, that's what it's been, right? So, but money used to be beads. Money used to be other things that was called money. It wasn't always paper. That's just
right.
what it just so happened it has been for a while, right? And then the U.S. dollar has been the global reserve currency for roughly 80 years, and it's right around the average of every other subsequent global reserve currency before it. So we're up against that. The Fourth Turning is a phenomenal book. I don't say I know exactly, all the details of that book. I've listened to it once. I got to listen to it another probably 20 times to really absorb the entire book. It's very deep. But the Fourth Turning, like everything, all the epics lining up, and then reading When Money Dies, and understanding Weimar Republic, what happened there, understanding inflation, understanding all these things put together. When you overlay them on top of each other, then you start asking, okay, then what's the answer to all this? What's going to happen, and where, like as you mentioned, where can I store my monetary energy? Because you have to ask that. And obviously, we talk about this a lot on the podcast, but money goes somewhere. People are going to store their value somewhere, right? So we've seen that in sports cars and Bitcoin and hard assets essentially, right? And you've seen that because people aren't just going to sit around and hold fiat and just hope, and just rely on the government to not print money on them and not inflate their purchasing power away. People know it's going to happen. Unfortunately, those that don't have money in assets or didn't have money in assets, before '08 or after '08, and then now, and from last year, the dollar supply, as you mentioned, was, it was like 25% and 30% of the entire supply of the dollar was printed in a year. And that's that is, a tax on the individuals if you're not allocated. Right. And then, so that goes back to, well, if the money is slowly dying, fiat is a slow bleed. This might be like a Michael Goldstein ish, from some of his writings back in 2014, Nakamoto Institute, him and Pierre Richard, phenomenal writings back then. But just it's a fiat slow bleed. So it's like a death by 1,000 cuts or 10,000
Right.
cuts, 100,000 cuts. You don't even realize it's happening. But what's interesting this year is like it's happened so fast, and like the cost of lumber and even CPI, the most manipulated number in financial history, core inflation, it's only 4%. Give me a break. When lumber's up, 160%, and every other good is up, 40, 60, 80% in a year or whatever. We
Right.
know this.
I think it was with CPI. If you just simply add back in the housing market, just that one thing that's not tracked in CPI, then it shows that the CPI rate is actually a little above 10%. So, and it's like that's just one thing not tracked in CPI. You add in healthcare and commodities and energy, like a whole bunch of things that people use on a daily basis. You can only start to imagine what that number starts to look like.
So it's just, and I try to take a big picture with things, and then you can kind of make micro like actions essentially, and have the details, the larger details, to then have action. So then if the system's broken, you have to have an answer. So the answer really isn't fiat denominated assets,
Right.
because it's still fiat in the end. Apple
It's
stock
also
is.
why
Mhm.
it's also why I think gold no longer works, because I mean the debate with Justra and Saylor was a great debate. Um,
Mhm.
but I think that the point that Michael Saylor makes is that like you look at people who are in gold and every single one of them is like 10% as a hedge. But if it's just a hedge, that's an idea that means that at some point you believe that the inflation comes back down and that you sell the gold, the 10% position, back into that fiat denominated debt system. But if you're trending towards not only inflation, but hyperinflation, the actual end of the system, what does gold do for you? Because if you have your significant portion of your wealth in gold, like how do you transact in the 21st century in gold? Like if I want to go on another year-long backpacking trip, do I like get my magic Santa sack and like fill it with gold coins and bricks and like travel around the world with that? And then even if I could theoretically do it, how do I break it down in small enough portions to buy coffee with that in Vietnam that costs like the equivalent of a nickel in dollar terms? There's so many flaws with trying to replace the dollar with gold. It just seems completely unlikely. I mean, the only thing I could think of would be to repeg the dollar to gold, and there's a lot of flaws with that potential as well. I'm not even sure it's possible at this point.
So then, yeah, so the continuation point on that was, then you start asking, well, what is money? Right. And then so obviously Breedlove has a podcast, What is Money? It's like, I think he said has 8 episodes with Jeff Booth.
Mm.
Another phenomenal voice in the space. And just understanding that question. So then people start asking, what is money? And I feel like more and more people in my life have started asking, like they're starting to ask those questions. Right. So like even when I first like mentioned, my cousin in 2013 mentioned Bitcoin to me. And I was like, get out of here. Like, what are you even talking about? Internet money, blah, blah, blah. That's was kind of the meme, then, even then back then. So I'm just like, whatever. I didn't want to, I'm not even looking into this. And I didn't really even start taking it seriously. It's funny. Like you said, 16, right around when all the hype was happening around the ETF back then, when the price was
Okay.
spiking or pulling back based on like ETF comments. If people remember that, like early 17, late 16, that was at like the ETF. So like that was like the first time. Plus it was retesting those $1,000 to $1,200 highs. So if an
Yeah,
asset,
you were more in it than me at that point. Like this is
Mhm.
a conversation I wasn't around for.
But it was just because it kind of pulled traditional financial market people away, because the term ETF came out around
Mm.
Bitcoin. Like there was a first, I think 15, was it 14 or 15? I can't remember if it was 15 was the first application or 14 was the first application. But like 16, there was a lot more hype around it at the end of 16. Like there might be an approval. Of course, it never happened, and we're still looking for one. So
Right.
anyway, that was like the first time, and then that helped kind of create that momentum of price action to get back to the highs from 2013. So anytime an asset goes 4 years and goes sideways, right, and then retest those previous highs, it doesn't matter if it's coffee or lumber, it doesn't matter. Like it's just an interesting, especially for speculators, essentially for
Right.
like and whatnot. So like that was like conceptually how like the first time I really, and even then though, it's funny. I tell a story like then I didn't really even dive in as far as allocating capital until the China FUD came out, and China exchanges were, they were to ban exchanges, and it went from 4,900 to like 3,000. So right on that range, which I'm going to get to in a minute, because it's kind of, I think, where we kind of are in this cycle. I don't, usually we always got to talk about price at some point, but I think it's, obviously an interesting time to talk about that. But to close out what we mentioned earlier, people are asking about like, what is money? And then what money do I want to hold? And I still feel like the conversation's not geared towards enough like Bitcoin is money and not just an asset. And I still, when I tell people like I hold Bitcoin as my money, not as a portfolio allocation. Like
Right.
Satoshi sats are my unit of account. And so
I think
I don't know, and it's hard because if I lead with that, I get some very weird looks from very good friends of mine. So I have to pull back, because that's not a very good pitch when you say stuff like that. Like they're like, okay, I'm out. Like I don't really want to know anymore, because you're talking about a totally different financial system. But
right.
at some point, like you just understand what money is, what money has been in the past, and then you see where money's going, and it's
I agree.
Bitcoin. So like, but you have to put all those things together.
I think there's an argument to be made that the extent to which you're having the conversation about medium of exchange, and then potentially eventually finding your way into unit of account really depends on who you're talking to. So for younger generations, my age, maybe a little bit older and like kind of trending down towards the 20s, we've all grown up through just like every few years is some crazy financial crisis. It's like the whole thing blows up, and the the extent to which we see that it's kind of manipulated becomes more and more evident. Whereas for the the elder generation, coming back to like my uncle, I keep bringing him up because I've been now in Texas for a few months, so I've spent more time in the past, I don't know, 2.5, 3 months with my aunt and uncle than I have in the 30 years leading up to this past year. And Bitcoin has been the conversation we've been on, because it's like, guys, listen, like I mean, my uncle just retired and literally started a new job days later because they aren't capable of maintaining the lifestyle without the stream of income, while like things in the investment portfolio are still kind of being hashed out and trying to figure out like what makes sense. And it's weird to find that there is this understanding kind of subconsciously for them that like it's the devaluing of the dollar that's the problem. Like they understand that their money is losing value, and yet when you show them this asset that is a store of value, the conversation goes so quickly back to, but how do I spend it? I'm getting into my retirement and like I want to be able to experience things and do things with it, and you're trying to pitch that it's this store of value where it's like you just hold on to it, and it's a very delicate balance depending on who you're talking to. And again, honestly, it's just time that needs to play out. Like if you're in Guatemala, medium of exchange for Bitcoin is already very apparent. But medium of exchange when you're in the US denominated dollar system, like I can use my Visa card, my MasterCard, the dollar bill in my pocket. I can use that at any retailer easily and it doesn't fail. It works quickly. So why would I switch to something that is not, it doesn't really have the infrastructure for payments where I live? Yeah, man, it's early, I guess, is the only thing that I come back to. Is it's just very, very early.
And that's what excited. Obviously, you know, I'm super excited about Lightning and what's being built on layer 2. I just had, you know, Zebedee on last week and they've integrated Bitcoin into CSGO.
Yeah, I saw that.
You saw that. So like, and most people have no clue. Like when people, that's actually the most watched podcast I've ever done, because people are like, I didn't know they've infused Bitcoin into CSGO. Most people don't know that. They don't even know Lightning exists and what it is and how that it's going to change the way that Bitcoin is transacted on. So like, people that are obviously, it's their Bitcoin is their life and they know it, but it's not to the point yet where it has a user interface that it's easy to use in a sense. So, and obviously that's coming, and that just comes with time. So I kind of say Lightning is like Bitcoin circa 2012, almost. It's like that's the feel, and that's what a lot of people say. Like, yeah, it's you know, embryonic, just coming out of the embryonic phase, and it's in its infancy. And that you know,
yeah, I think it's time versus necessity. So we're just not at the phase where necessity is kind of forcing faster development. Like again, if you're in Guatemala, if you're in Turkey, if you're in Venezuela, then like Lightning Network makes 100% sense to you very, very quickly. But in the US, I'm not at the point yet where to like go grocery shopping, I have to take a wheelbarrow of cash with me to be able to do that grocery shopping. So the necessity of the inflation of the dollar has not yet reached a place where it's forcing faster development of the medium of exchange. And that's where we come back to. It's like at the moment, the most relevant conversation for somebody like a citizen of the United States of America is at least in my mind, is the conversation around the store of value. Like, listen, you can spend it if you want to, and there are ways to do that. You could sell it back into fiat. You could run a node and open your own channel and do Lightning Network transactions. You can get like a Fold app card. There's many ways that if you really wanted to spend your Bitcoin, you could do it. But you might just be better off using the dollars for right now. Like what you need to spend in your day-to-day, month-to-month existence, like keep that denominated in dollars, and for the value you want to hold on to for the future, put that in a non-dollar denominated asset like Bitcoin.
And then, Thayer's law, Gresham's law. I like Thayer's law. I think Thayer's law is a little more interesting. I think more people are familiar with Gresham's law. Bad money drives out good money, but Thayer's law is good money drives out bad money. So the bad money is being fiat, and that's the one you spend. Like that's what you get rid of. But the good money is Bitcoin, and that's what you hold. So that's that store of value versus spending, like dichotomy between the two. So I really like Thayer's law. I do like Thayer's law because it's interesting. Like the other thing, and I mentioned this probably once a podcast, so people probably tired of me talking about this, but I do think it's important that people pull up a price chart of 12 years of BTC USD on TradingView and look at BLX. It takes you all the way back to 2010, and it shows you, like, charts are art to me. And that's just my opinion. I can get way too deep on charting, but like charts are like to me, and it's not for the use of trading, but like you pull it up and you just look to see what has happened. All you have to do is look at a BTC USD chart of actually the BLX chart's better. You get 2 more years of price action. But from 2010 until now, the dollar is crashing against Bitcoin. That's what it's really saying. When you flip it upside down, there's a Sats USD chart. That's even better. They just came out with that on it's so Sats USD, and everybody and the plebs know what I'm talking about. But it's just straight down, and the dollar is crashing against Bitcoin. So it's one money versus another, and one money is being destroyed because partly because the money printing all that, but also because that some of that value is going into Bitcoin as well.
Yeah, it's a true price discovery. I mean, that's why you hear the conversation around like ignore the noise and focus on the signal. And that chart you're describing is the signal. It's for 12 years now, Bitcoin has basically been a signal pointing you in the very direction that you just described, which is that like, hey, look, man, versus Bitcoin, the dollar is not doing very well. So you have a free market money, can't be manipulated, can't be confiscated, works worldwide. Anybody has access to it who has the ability to turn on a smartphone and gain access to an internet connection. And in that true free market money, what you're seeing is volatility in that asset in the short term is because human beings are actively trying to discover true price signal. We are working out as a collective unit around the world to try and discover what the true price of Bitcoin is. So we've got a lot more volatility ahead if you're tracking it in the hourly, weekly, monthly, yearly. But again, when you zoom out to that chart of 12 years, it's just straight up. And I don't think that's going to stop trending in that direction because the dollar is nowhere near done trending down. They have no way to turn it off. There's more printing coming. There's more buying of bonds coming. There's no way out of it for them. They have no solution.
I want to talk about price in just a second and continue on the conversation. If you do have a question, feel free to let us know. We can pull those up. Twitter/Periscope. I don't even know what to say anymore because I think it's Periscope, but it's on Twitter. Like, who knows these days? It's kind of a mess. But yeah, if you're on one of those two, it's still working. YouTube's working, and I think LinkedIn's working, although I think it went down, so I'm not really sure. So just type something in the chat and see if it pops up. We'll try to pull it up if you have a question on something. I do want to get back to price. It's kind of hard not to talk about it. But so we just mentioned like the 12-year aspect, and there's been 3, 4/5 cycles. It depends on what you determine as a cycle. Is it just the halvings, just cycles, or if there's just looking at different price only cycles or whatever? But there's roughly been 3 to 5. Obviously, prices went from 64 to 30K. But I just want to preface this also with it's in fiat, it's in dollars. When we say 64K to 30K, that's priced in dollars. And it's important to understand. So it's funny how, I think most Bitcoiners know this, but people that maybe look on the outside, it's like, oh, it's so volatile. Yeah, it's volatile compared to the dollar. But Bitcoin, if you had one Bitcoin it's still one Bitcoin. That did not change. It was up to you to change the value of how much Bitcoin you have. Like you had the
Right.
power to get rid of it some way or send it, or like no one told you to do anything with it just because the volatility compared to the dollar is going down or going up. So, and then if it's your money, if it's your money, nothing has changed the past 3 weeks. Nothing.
Right.
And it takes emotion out of it. And I don't hear enough people talking about that either. It really does. It takes the emotion out of it. If you have X amount of Bitcoin, it's the same thing in a week later, no matter how you measure it against fiat. But it's the discovery, and people are just discovering what it is, right? And then on top of that too, just to add a layer, and I'll let you kind of give your perspective what's happened the last couple of weeks, but also there's leverage. There's people trading this thing. People aren't just buying it and storing value. I mean, there's derivatives. The leveraged market it was insane how much leverage there was in this market the past couple of weeks, right? And then you get over leveraged, get liquidations, and that's what happens. So it has fundamentally had nothing to do, right? It's the emotions of how it's measured in fiat, and then the tweet, Elon's tweets and this tweet and all that layered up, and I think somewhat of a coordinated attack and all that. And I don't want to get into Bitcoin mining right now, and the energy thing and all that cascaded. And if you have all that leverage, you get liquidations, and that's how you go from 64 to 30, and then it was one of the kind of one of the craziest moments. I mean, for me, the past 5 years, this reminds me of the China exchange night. Like I think that was in summer 2017 when it went from 49 to 3,000. It really reminded me of that and that kind of level of panic and people yelling and screaming. It's going back down to 800 and all that. I'll never forget that. You know what I'm saying? So I mean, people were literally saying, "Oh, it's going back down to 15,000, 10,000, 8,000 on Twitter and stuff." It's like emotions take over people, and it's just crazy.
I
anyway,
wish.
Yeah, I know, right? Yeah. So anyway, your kind of thought. I just completely rambled on that, but I mean, kind of your thoughts, like the last couple of weeks, and you want to add?
Yeah, no, dude. I think the best way to sum up what you just said, at least the way I hear what you're saying, is that the volatility is actually 100% caused by the dollar's volatility. Like the volatility in Bitcoin is actually the dollar's volatility, not Bitcoin's volatility. If you have reached the place where you understand that Bitcoin is your unit of account, where like I just simply care about collecting as many Satoshis as I possibly can because I understand that is what will replace this super broken dollar system, then the crashing price, like the only time the crashing price is ever going to matter is if the core protocol breaks and we're going to zero. Like then that crash sucks because then my 1 Bitcoin or 2 Bitcoin or 3 Bitcoin, they don't matter anymore. But as long as the core protocol keeps ticking along, as long as a new block gets mined every 10 minutes, I don't really care what the dollar price is. And in fact, I am normally quite happy when we're crashing in dollar denominated price because it makes buying Satoshis more accessible. It just like the longer we stay in this price range, the better it is for the individual retail style user before we start getting to that place of like huge retail adoption where it's you get NIDIG integrating it into banks, and all of these energy companies start using flare gas to become Bitcoin mining companies. And the next thing you know, it becomes impossible for the average person to pump the monopoly money into a true valuable asset. And listen, you'll still have access to it because you'll be able to work for it. It's a great money because it's literally going to incent. When you come back to like mental health, one of the things that's really powerful about Bitcoin is it incentivizes a peaceful society. You can't steal it, so you can't go to war for it. Like you bomb somebody's house who's holding a bunch of gold, and like you can sift through the rubble and the gold will still be there. But if you bomb my house, you come fly over my FedEx truck and you bomb my FedEx truck, like come try and steal the Bitcoin, you're shit out of luck. The Bitcoin is out of your reach now, and like you're completely out of luck. The best thing anybody can do in a Bitcoin denominated society is to add value to society. So I think it incentivizes in many ways like a much healthier society, because we're going to stop fighting over the greed of like trying to get as many dollars as possible, and we're just going to work on like taking care of the community around us. Like what can I do to add value to where I live, to my own life, to the people around me's lives? And like that's how you'll earn Bitcoin. So
And people shouldn't be able to steal your money.
right.
This is the most simple thing ever, but it's like no one should be able to steal my money. So I have a 12-word seed phrase. Good luck getting it. Like,
People shouldn't
seriously.
be able to feel anything. So like this is a really interesting question I heard brought up in a Twitter Spaces earlier. It's like when people like don't seem to get that, ask them this question: like name one thing, name one other asset you can hold that can't be stolen. Like your property, your gold, your dollars. Like what assets can you buy and hold that can't be confiscated? Maybe there's a few out there, like information, like you've got an idea, like somebody can't steal ideas, but like what other asset is truly 100% non-confiscatable? They don't exist. And that's amazing. So like when you start really talking about powerful levels of freedom, like a money that you truly hold that cannot be confiscated, that's next level stuff, man.
It's again power to individual. It's the opposite. It's from like the power from the oligarchy is getting pulled from them, and then it's being spread to the individuals, and that's what Bitcoin does because of that 12-word seed phrase that you're not going to get from me for my value. That's what's so
Right.
powerful about it. Like I get to protect my money in a protocol, right? The most secure protocol in the world over everything. There's nothing more secure than Bitcoin, right? And it's an asset that has the highest Sharpe ratio. Like to get like fiat financial here, it has the highest Sharpe ratio than any other asset class in the world. It's performed better by magnitudes of numbers than any other asset. So I get the security of it, and it's the best performing asset. Like it's just cheating. Think about that. I want people to think about that. Like, so you've got these multi layers of what it is. It's not just one thing, right?
Yeah.
So I don't hear that a ton of being talked about, like the security of it, and it's a highest performing asset, all within like one sentence.
Yeah, I mean, listen, they NGU, number go up technology, right? It's a very interesting thing because again, at some point that number go up technology will balance out. We'll find a relatively stable, like fixed unit price when the last Bitcoin's mined and the general dissemination is over. And at that point, we're just using peer-to-peer transactions for the value you add into society. I don't know what that'll look like. I mean, it's a society we've never seen before, but maybe it's like a steady 2% increase in value basically forever after that. And so then you no longer have to do this thing where what we do in fiat is we speculate to try and beat the devaluation rate of the dollar in assets that do better in the increase than in the decrease of the dollar. You don't have to do that. I think there's an argument to be made that a lot of people in a lot of asset classes, in a world where money is not being devalued, where the money is something you can just store your value in, and it just had a steady 2% increase, a lot of people would no longer hold 10 luxury apartments in the London market and the San Francisco market and the New York market. They wouldn't be gambling on random startup companies. I mean, listen, some people will, and that's we'll still be building new companies. I think that's great. But like, there's a lot of risk taking that happens in the fiat world that like a lot of people would give up if they could just guarantee a 2% increase by just simply holding their money. And that's going to happen. That's going to happen through network effect. Like we've got many, many, many more years of number go up technology because you have this asset that's still very early. That's going to say it's going to follow the same kind of principles that applied to Facebook, that applied to Google, that applied to Amazon. It's network effect. The more people use it and understand it and benefit from it, the more people that get involved with it. And we're seeing that right now. I mean, it's moving from retail into like the early phases of even institutional adoption, starting to really understand what's happening in this space.
And then just the smartest, look, this is a basic way to put it, but the smartest people in the world are building on it. Pay attention. Like people need to pay attention to that. Like, isn't that like they are building on it, right? I mean, and all the companies building, whether it's building on Lightning, financial services being built on top. Like I got to give a shout out to Unchained. I'm a user, love Unchained, like what they've built down in Austin. And it's just, but people are going to continue to build and innovate on top of it. And they're just people are just done with the old system and they want to build on the new system. They don't want to build on the old system going to zero. They want to build on the new system. So
it's super exciting.
Once you cross the chasm, man, like I know we've done that ourselves, but once you've done it, you don't go back. There isn't, you cross the chasm and you go back. Like once you're in the matrix, it's like you're in the matrix. So, so we do have a question. So EPIM 10 on Twitter. I want to grab this real quick. It's actually a really good question. So I've heard of hyper Bitcoinization and ideas that'll happen around 2025. What are your thoughts?
You want to start that, or you want me to start that?
Yeah, that's okay. So 2021, we got 4 more. That's going to be, we have another halving. By the way, I made a post a couple days ago. It's 3 more years to another halving. They don't stop. The halvings keep coming. Like, no one wants. Everyone's talking what happened last week. I'm like, all right, you short time preference people. There's a halving coming in 3 years, and then in 7 years, and then 11 years. Like it's going to keep becoming more scarce. Anyway, so I like kind of throwing it out there, but. Yeah, I mean, look, obviously no one knows. No one has any idea when hyper Bitcoinization happens or how it happens. All I know is that it was going to happen at some point, that it's going to happen at some point. But last year just accelerated it. Like the end. Like that's the overall story. Like it just accelerated it. When 25% of the dollar supply got printed last year, that means hyper Bitcoinization is that much closer. Does it mean that it was going to happen in 2045 and now it happens in 2030? I don't know. Maybe it cuts off a decade or something, but it obviously just increased, or it shortened the time period between now and when that does happen. When it happens, obviously no one knows that. By 2025, that aforementioned halving is going to happen. So it's going to be even more scarce. So we're going to have another supply crisis in Bitcoin, after every single halving in 2012, 16, and 20. So and they're going to continue to print fiat. And I always forget, I knew I was going to forget this. Whatever term Breedlove has, 1,000 terms. I have no idea what he's talking about. But like the depreciation of fiat, like when it gets printed, it's like acceleration of something. It's another Breedlove term. So, but like basically when fiat gets printed at a certain level, it doesn't go back.
Right.
Basically what that means.
I think we're already there.
I mean, I think it actually depends on your EPIM. It depends on your definition of what is hyper Bitcoinization, because I think, as you said, you could argue it's happening now. So I guess kind of your thoughts.
Yeah, I based on the conversation I've heard around the idea of hyper Bitcoinization, to me again, I think you could argue that it's already starting to happen. This really does depend on what your idea of hyper Bitcoinization is. My idea of hyper Bitcoinization, for me, that means that we're no longer using the dollar fiat system as we know it, and the world has adopted and is transacting primarily on the Bitcoin standard. I mean, the global settlement layer. I guess that's the way to sum it up for me. Hyper Bitcoinization is the world's settlement layer has become Bitcoin. Are there things built on top of that? Lightning Network, central bank digital currencies? I don't really know. I don't know at what point you consider all of the subtleties in the idea of hyper Bitcoinization. So to just boil it down to something that seems like hyper Bitcoinization, I would say that the global standard for settlement has become Bitcoin. By 2025, I mean, not impossible. I also don't have a crystal ball, so I couldn't possibly tell you the answer is yes or no, but I said it earlier in the chat. I do believe that it is probably likely that the fiat regime has longer than some of us really want to accept. And to your point, the even the idea of the halvings, I was having this conversation again on Twitter Spaces last night. It's like, I don't know how much time we need for the development of the physical world infrastructure. It's like we have a global chip mining shortage. Like we don't have enough processors to mine more Bitcoin and to further develop. We can't even get trucks off the lot, let alone mine more Bitcoin. And I don't know how relevant. Again, some people really love plan B and the stock to flow model, I think it's a really brilliant model. I don't know how long it lasts in relevancy. I'm not sure that the halvings will have the same kind of profound effect that they have kind of shown on charts to have had up until now. I mean, we're at 19 of the 21 million already. I mean, how much more scarce does it get? It's like at some point you just have to realize that the majority of what is in Bitcoin is already out there. And when you go from 625 a day to 312 and a half a day, it's like, is that really that significant? Like, I don't know. Maybe not, but I think we've probably got a while longer than 2025. I think ultimately, to sum up my answer, it's 10 to 15 years until we may see hyper Bitcoinization. And just because I think it needs that much time to be ready to replace the dollar. If the dollar were to just completely collapse tomorrow, it would be global calamity. And I don't think that the Bitcoin network system, the infrastructure built around it, I don't think it's ready to just 100% fully on board in the next couple weeks, couple months, maybe even couple years.
He was talking about how the protocol is set up and talking about the supply issuance and like if Satoshi thought about this, but like how price has these cycles and how obviously Bitcoin is dead meme is kind of a funny meme. But if she, them thought about it as far as when like he gets all this momentum, then it dies and it takes away the attention. If it would just went straight, someone was trying to explain that like with the supply issuance and how it's changed every 4 years and how it kind of creates these cycles. Has those cycles created the ability to allow Bitcoin to grow, right? In the way that it has, like almost like it's like under the radar, but not at the same time. I'm not saying it the way they did, but it's really interesting to think about that because it's gotten to the point. If it would have been more of a straight line versus cycles, like would we be where we are now? Would governments would have stepped in earlier? If that makes sense.
Right.
I always think about that. It's really fascinating to think about, like, because supply issuance could have been something totally different.
Right.
So I think about that a lot.
I mean, I hear a lot of people talk about how much stuff gets like how much stuff in the last bear market came out. I mean, like the Lightning Network came out of the last bear market when people weren't paying attention because no one was really noticing the price was on a steady rise up. It was just like people were just out there building things. And so, yes, I think what you're saying, it makes sense to me. I think the fact that we've had the cycles that we've had and not just like this straight line up has been crucial. And I think it's still crucial. I think we still have years left to play out that kind of infrastructure development to be able to onboard the global settlement system.
And one last point is, like, it should take time. Right. I hear like Jimmy's Song talk about this on Clubhouse and stuff. But I mean, it just takes time. Like, this is money we're talking about. This is an entirely new system. So when I ever hear this thing, Bitcoin is slow and all this trash out there, this is the money that we're going to be adopting. So we need to do it right. And I don't say we as in me as a developer. I'm not a Bitcoin core developer, but I'm just saying, it has to be done the right way. Because like you said, it's going to be the money that we adopt. So, and some of us have already adopted. So, so even those are really good questions. So obviously no one knows. And then, price is going to do what it does. No one has any idea, target wise. All I know is fiat's going to continue to be printed at really high levels. Okay. So that term I mentioned earlier, it's the law of accelerating issuance and depreciation. So I always forget. I had to write it down because I always forgot. So law of accelerating issuance and depreciation. So as the fiat currency issuance is accelerated, it depreciates, which makes sense. Right. It's kind of like a supply thing, which is obviously the antithesis of Bitcoin. So it's just something that it's just really fascinating to me. Like fiat is the exact opposite of Bitcoin, and Bitcoin is replacing what it is. So it's a better money replacing an old money. And I just think about this stuff a lot. It's really cool to kind of talk to you about it and kind of get your thoughts.
I mean, listen, man, I don't know a single Bitcoiner who's not super excited about the money. I mean, you've heard the saying, everybody knows the saying, fix the money, fix the world. And I think that's an incredibly accurate statement, man. I think from what I've experienced, so many of the issues that I see around the world just stem from one single problem, and that is that money is broken. And we don't have enough time in this podcast to really get into like the nitty gritty of that, but there's hundreds and maybe even thousands of hours of people who have done that work and done that research, and it's out there if you're looking for it. And so like, yeah, do your homework, man, because like a lot of the issues that the world faces around the globe today could just simply be fixed if we just had a better money system.
So I got a last question for you. So what's the one thing that's changed the most about you, like after you fully grasped in Bitcoin? Now I say fully grasp in light because we're always learning every day, obviously. But at your sticking point, like what has changed the most about you once you fully got to that point with Bitcoin that it changed you?
Man, that's a deep question. Um, just off the top of my head, the first thing that came to mind is probably the shift in my time preference.
Hmm.
It's that idea of high time preference, like the idea of needing to get rich quick, the idea of like needing everything to work out right now. It's like it's slowed down my need for everything to work out exactly the way it's supposed to right now. Like, yes, I want hyper Bitcoinization. Yes, I I I mean, listen, I grew up in the fiat system too, so I still get the dopamine hit to some extent when we go from 30,000 to 60,000. Like, it's all very interesting, but I don't really care how long it takes. I just want to contribute what I can to help make sure that it does go in that direction, and I'm in no rush to get there. It's like I take it day by day, and I think that's really what's changed the most, is that just like my time preference has really slowed down. The things that scared me about not happening fast enough don't freak me out anymore. Does that make sense?
It does. I'm thinking, it's funny you ask a question and then like you try to answer yourself and you have to like say your thing, but like if I had to answer it, I feel like you have to go through a full cycle to really understand this. And some people might take this the wrong way in some way, maybe. But like if you converted and adopted Bitcoin like through an entire like cycle between the beginning to the end of a cycle and you held through it all, it really you're holding a better money. So if you have a long time preference that's maybe longer than a cycle, you now have more money. Like you now have more monetary energy, so that you therefore don't have to risk yourself, risk the fiat. Like if you're in the fiat standard, you don't have to risk that fiat that you made in other investments to take more risk on top of the risk you made with your occupation. Like some
Right.
occupations are risky. So you're taking the risk at your occupation and then taking that monetary value and risking it again in
Right.
markets and trading or whatever. So it allows you, if you adopt a better money, in the end, humans want better money. You look at monetary history. And
Because we want our time. I mean, as you're describing, we want our time. So like when it comes back to that never-ending loop of like the more Bitcoin you accumulate, the more time you realize you're saving yourself later and now. It's like now I have more time to dedicate to the things that actually make sense to me. Instead of having to use my time to gamble, to take all those risks, I can take less risks, use more time to educate, to build, to create, and all of that. It's just an endless feedback loop. So it's like once you understand that Bitcoin is time savings, it's more than just money. It's literally saving your time. Like, how do I preserve my time? That's what Bitcoin gives you. And once you understand that it's a monetary network that also saves you your valuable life energy, there's no going back from that. I have no desire to gamble and risk and get into shit coins and play in the stock market, day trading. It's just like I just try to accumulate as much Bitcoin as I can, and I use the rest of my time to keep learning about how I can further develop the space as a whole.
optionality is another word. It
Yeah.
gives you the time and options to really to look more inner into yourself, versus, external of what I got to do this to keep up. Like the one last thing I'll say is like, just like Sailor says, every month, like let's say inflation, this is being very generous, is going to be 12% a year going forward. It's probably going to be more than that. Let's just say 12 though. That's every month. If you have money sitting in a traditional bank, you're losing 1% every single month, just doing nothing. Just it's sitting there. And that's the hurdle rate. What if that hurdle rate is 12%, 15%, 20%? It was 25% last year. That's what they printed last year. And the law of acceleration, Breed loves term. I done forgot it again, but that keeps happening. The genie's out of the bottle. You can't put the vapor back in. You can't. It's not possible, right? And so that's where you're at. And if you're not on the correct standard, if you don't have the right money, go look at Weimar. Go look at monetary history all the way through. When there was ever a time where money got inflated. I love Safedeen's book, obviously Bitcoin Standard. If you haven't read Bitcoin Standard, you have to read that book because it gives you a very good understanding of what money is. The first half of the book, and once what it was seashells, I forgot what money he was talking about, but once those got inflated by people that traveled into that country and then brought more, it was over for that money. That money basically was worthless at that point once it was inflated. Guess what? Same thing's happening with fiat. The same thing's happening with fiat, but we're not feeling it, and especially in the U.S. because we're insulated somewhat. So, well, hey man, we're over time. I figured that would happen. I know we have a lot more to talk about. I have to bring you back on. We'll definitely have to play some CS:GO on some Zebedee and all that, and play for some Sats because we'll definitely have to do that at some point.
Dude, I haven't played video games since like Super Nintendo. That sounds like a real quick way to lose Satoshis.
Well, they're like sponsored. They're sponsored servers, so you don't have to put anything up. So.
Oh, okay, cool. All right, I'm on board.
We'll have to check it out next time. But man, how can people get in touch with you? Is it mainly on Twitter? So at the Bitcoin Bum.
Yep, that's really the only platform I'm active on today. So if you really want to get in contact, reach out to me there. I'm there a lot. Again, Bitcoin has freed up my time enough that at this point it's just trying to develop my own personal thing inside the Bitcoin space. So Bitcoin Twitter, and then in real life, it's trying to find work inside one of the 4 Bitcoin companies that exist in the United States of America currently. So
and there's so many companies doing so many great things. You mentioned Zebedee, you mentioned Strike, you mentioned Unchained. I could sit here and talk, Lolly and Fold, and just really cool what everyone's building. So shout out to all the companies building right now. So, well, hey man, appreciate you jumping on. This will be replayed and everything. Appreciate your time. But yeah, we'll have to jump on for a second podcast soon.
Yeah, cool, man. Thanks for having me. Just let me know if you're ready to do another one. I'll be here.
Sounds good, man. Oh, and the last thing, so you do Twitter Spaces. You did the first one like 2 days ago, like yesterday?
Yeah, I think that was the first one I hosted myself. I jumped into a room a couple of nights ago, and the host that night was like having connection issues. It kept booting him out, so I kind of took over hosting that one. But like the first one I ever just like jumped in and set up myself was last night. So yeah, that's definitely going to be much more frequent. I quite enjoy the Twitter Spaces. So if you like free flowing conversation that ranges from like Bitcoin to deep dives down the philosophical rabbit hole, like consciousness, that's kind of where some of the conversations have gone thus far. So.
Yeah, we got to have more fitness stuff and everything else. So you'll just have to come on another podcast, man, and then or jump on some Twitter Spaces. So make sure to follow Kyle at the Bitcoin Bum. Appreciate you, man. And